Well, for the past few weeks, we've been taking a look at Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And what I think we've found out, what we discovered, is that the Ephesian people really weren't all that different from you and me. The people of Ephesus, they lived in a world that was constantly trying to pull them back into old ways of living, back into patterns and habits that they had vowed to give up once they had met Jesus. And so Paul is writing this letter, and he's telling them, there's a new way. There's a new king. There's a new kingdom. And it's a way that calls us to give up our rights for the sake of others. But Jesus doesn't just tell us what to do. He leads by example, right? He leads by example. He models what it means for us to surrender control all throughout his life. And he invites us to do the same thing, to surrender control. But we all know control is not easy to give up, right? I mean, we kind of like being in control. That's a hard thing to do. And so how do we get to the point in our lives where we're willing to put aside old ways and live in this new reality that God calls us to? When the culture all around us and the world all around us says it's all about me, how do I get out of this rut where I keep believing that I can do this thing on my own? I just need to try a little bit harder. And the world says, man, it's all about me. Paul makes it very clear. It's not just about me. It's about we. It's about us doing it together. Faith isn't something that I manage by myself, but it is very much communal. And so we've been using this imagery of a house, a home that we've been given, this beautiful home, and we choose to stay in the garage. We choose to stay in this place where it's just me, and I don't have to worry about anything else, but I'm missing out on the best part of the gift. I have this whole house, and I choose to stay in the one place that was not meant to be a dwelling place. But last week, we decided to go into the house, and we found out there are other people living there too. You gotta be kidding me, right? You gave me this gift, and now there's other people that I gotta share it with, and I don't even know if I like these people. We don't have anything in common, whatever it might be. But regardless, we're there. And so now the question becomes, how do I navigate these relationships that I'm forced to deal with? How do I live in this house with these other people that are around me? And then we go into the kitchen and we see the dishes are piling up in the sink. And we're like, could somebody put the dishes away? Like, how hard is it to just rinse the plate off, put it in the dishwasher when you're done eating, right? And we start navigating these questions and managing this tension. And we go, I wish people would just pick up after themselves, right? And then maybe we go, you know what? I'll just do it myself. And maybe we say it loud enough that they can hear us in the other room. I'll just take care of it. Or maybe we look at it and we go, you know, I didn't put the dishes in the sink. I'm not the one who chose not to put them in the dishwasher. Maybe if I wait long enough, somebody else will get the hint. Somebody else will just do it for me. How do we manage those relational tensions that we experience in our lives? And what about the moments when we are struggling with things that are going on in our own lives? Do we walk alongside the relationships that God has placed in our lives to help us and to guide us and be there for us? I think like many of us, right? Maybe after winter, heading into New Year's, we decide we're gonna get in shape, right? We've read some articles, we've seen some other people have done it, and we go, I'm gonna do that. And so we go, you know what? I'm motivated to do this. I wanna see change in my life. I create a plan. We might even go out and buy some equipment to throw in the basement so I can go down and I can make sure that this thing happens. But oftentimes we miss one key ingredient. We forget to invite somebody else in on that journey. We need a partner, a workout buddy, right? But nonetheless, we're motivated, we're excited. We get up early, everything is new, it's fresh. And we may even start seeing some results. Oh, my pants fit a little bit looser, right? Like, this is good, and we're kind of staying motivated. And then it starts to get a little bit easier. A little bit easier to take a day off. Maybe I don't need to do it every day. Maybe it's a little bit easier to hit the snooze button. I'm just gonna sleep an extra 10 minutes today. You know what, I'll just get up early tomorrow. Maybe we go back into some old habits. We had changed the way we were eating. Now we go back into some old habits of eating. Maybe we make excuses. Oh, my body kind of hurts. I probably should just rest for a little bit. And maybe we just stop pushing ourselves. And because we don't have that partner in our lives to challenge us and to encourage us and to motivate us to keep moving forward, we stop seeing growth. And maybe we do enough to say, well, I'm still active, but we're not growing anymore. And that's not only true when it comes to working out, it's a spiritual reality in our lives as well. Because I think many of us approach our faith in the exact same way. Someone invited us to come to church. I've heard great things. I come and I go, oh, this is good. This is good. And we were motivated. And we have a good intentions. And I want to be here every week. And I'm gonna start reading my Bible. We want to grow. We want to become strong. But we don't let other people in. That's a little too personal. I don't know if I want that much in my life. And when we don't, over time, we start to drift. We start to settle for things that are less than God's best for us. We fall back into old ways, habits, and patterns in our lives, and we get stuck. And I think if we're honest, that's so incredibly frustrating, isn't it? Like, it's so incredibly frustrating when we get to that place where we're stuck because we know who we want to be, but our lives are not matching that picture. There's a gap. There's a gap between who we are and who we want to be. And here's where many of us veer off course. We try to close that gap all by ourselves. We treat it like a personal do-it-yourself faith project, right? I'm gonna figure this out. It's just me and God. I'll watch a YouTube video. I can do this on my own. But when you read Paul's letter to the Ephesians, Paul gives us a completely different picture. Not isolated individuals, but a body. A body that is connected. A body that is dependent upon each other. A body that grows together. And so here's a truth that we're going to keep coming back to. Growth doesn't happen all alone. Growth happens together. And God isn't asking you to fix everything overnight, but he is shaping you. And he's shaping us together over time. And it starts here. Growth starts by simply choosing to walk together. We're gonna jump into Ephesians chapter 4. And Paul starts off this chapter by saying, walk in a manner worthy of your calling. And that sentence sounds really good. I don't walk in a manner worthy of my calling. But what is that? Well, Paul tells us. He tells us what it is. He says this, here's how it is to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. I mean, those are some pretty easy words to understand, right? Patient, humble, gentle, bearing with each other, not because I have to, but because out of love. That is not individualistic language, right? That is communal language. And it may come as a surprise to you, probably won't. But there have been times in my life where I've not been very gentle. There have been times in my life where I have been impatient with the people that I love the most, where I didn't offer as much grace as I should have in whatever the situation may have been. But there have also been moments in my life when those things have happened, where someone has come alongside me, and I was fortunate enough to have them call me out in love. I mean, I think there's a responsibility on my part to be who I want to be, but others helped hold me to that standard. That's how we live in community. Paul continues on. He says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Unity, another communal word. It's not about me, it's about us. Unity takes effort. You know what doesn't take unity? Or what doesn't take effort is disunity, right? Disunity. I mean, just, look on your social media feeds. There's disunity everywhere. That's easy to do. But unity takes effort. It means staying connected even when it's inconvenient, staying connected even when it's uncomfortable in our lives. I mean, I think most of us would say, I didn't like being called out necessarily when I was being impatient, when I wasn't showing grace. But every time I was called out in love, I knew I was better for it. I was appreciative because the person who was coming alongside me was helping me become all that God had created me to be. And when they walked beside me and they put their arm around me and they gently took those steps with me, it helped me move forward. It helped me grow. And I couldn't do that on my own. You know what happens when it's just me? When I try to fight that battle all by myself, you know what happens? I beat myself up. I just beat myself up. Instead of making things right, I just sit and dwell in the negativity. And it's not a good place to be. I can't move forward in that. Or I do this, I justify my actions, right? Well, I was just telling them the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts and you just gotta say it, right? I mean, I can justify what I was saying as well. And when that happens, guess what? It's frustrating. It's frustrating because I know that's not who I want to be. But when I give people permission to come into my life and lovingly hold me accountable, when I invite them in, that's when I start to see growth in my life. And I would imagine that there are many of us in this room that feel stuck in our spiritual growth. We feel stuck. We might be angry. We might be impatient. We might be struggling with the sin that nobody else knows about. And we're frustrated. This isn't what the brochure promised when I signed up to follow Jesus. I thought everything was supposed to be, just great, and now everything was gonna be perfect in my life. But the truth is this: we know we don't wanna live that way. That's why it's frustrating. That's why we get frustrated. And we get stuck in a rut. And it feels like we're just spinning our wheels and we're not sure how to get out. And so what is it for you? Where do you feel stuck or frustrated in your growth? It might be easy for you to answer. When you ask that question, there may be a flood of things that are coming to your mind. So here's a harder follow-up question. Who knows about it? Who knows about it in your life? Because if no one knows what it is you're going through, no one can walk alongside of you. And you can't grow in what you won't name. And you'll be frustrated trying to fight it on your own without community. If we want change, if we want to grow, growth requires change patterns together. And so Paul gets pretty direct here. Starting here in verse 17, he says this. He says, so I tell you this and insist on it. This isn't a suggestion, Paul says. I'm not just suggesting like, hey, you might want to think about it. I insist on it in the Lord that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in their futility of their thinking. I mean, in the city of Ephesus, there are people who are far from God. There's a world around them who are trying to pull those who have put their faith in Jesus back into their old way of life, back into old patterns and old habits. The temptation to live as the rest of the world does is very prevalent where they're at. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Sounds very similar to the world that we live in, I think. And Paul continues on. He says, having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality, so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they're full of greed. Pastor Paul shared with us in week 1 that this is the city of the Greek goddess Artemis, the goddess of sexual fertility. There is no shortage of debauchery that can happen in and around them. There is temptations everywhere. But Paul calls them back. He invites them back. Let me invite you back, Paul says. He says, that, however, is not the way of life that you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in your attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Paul says, put off the old ways. Those are old, those are gone. Get rid of those. Don't turn around and go back. You left those for a reason. He says, instead, put on the new self. Put on the new self that God has created you to be. And then Paul gets real practical in what this looks like for each of us. He says, therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer. Why? Because it's wrong to steal? Maybe, but there's more to it. Must do work, must do something useful with their own hands so that they may have something to share with those in need. He says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Well, I shouldn't cuss, I shouldn't tell dirty jokes. Well, maybe, but it goes deeper than that. He says, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. And then he gives them this reminder. And he says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ, God forgave you. Paul says, instead of lying, speak truth. Why do we not lie? Is it just because it's part of the 10 Commandments and it's a checklist that I can say, I didn't lie today? No, it's deeper than that. It's because we devalue the person that we're lying to. They don't have value in our lives. Paul says, instead of uncontrolled anger, take a deep breath, pause, respond differently. Instead of taking, Paul says, give, be generous. Instead of tearing people down with our words, and we can do that real fast, can't we? Paul says, build them up. And he says, be quick to forgive. Quick to forgive and remember how God has forgiven you. I mean, notice how relational those words are. It's not just about me, it's about we. And your habits don't just affect you. They affect the people around you. And so maybe we need to ask this question: what patterns or habits keep pulling you backward? Keep pulling you back into this old way of life? And not just what are they, but how are they impacting the people closest to you? Because it's very easy for us to say, well, it's only affecting me. It's only concerning me. But the truth is, our habits affect everyone around us. What you repeat, you reinforce in your life, and not just in your life, but in the relationships around you as well. But when you choose something different, you don't just grow personally, you help others grow as well. Because growth happens through mutual submission. We move into chapter 5 of Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And Paul says some of the most controversial words found in Scripture in this chapter. Although I don't know that they need to be all that controversial. I think maybe we have just taken them out of context, or others have taken them out of context, or we didn't understand them in their true context. Or worse, somebody has used those words as a gross misrepresentation of who God is. And they weaponize those words to try to manipulate, to try to control. And so before we get to those words, let me just say this. If you've ever found yourself in that position, I'm so sorry that somebody would have used God's words to twist and turn and make it something that they wanted to say for their gain and manipulate what God wanted to do in your life. That is never God's intent through his words. And so maybe as we go through this passage today, Maybe it will be freeing for you. Maybe as we learn together what this true context is, it'll help us understand better. And so we've been using this imagery of the house, right? We started in the garage where we were by ourselves. We moved into the house. We found there were other people. We had to learn how to navigate those relationships. But now as we've been in the house, we find, there's one person that I think I want to spend a little bit more time with, that I want to get to know a little bit better. And so Paul jumps into the marriage relationships that he wants to discuss and help us understand as we look at this most intimate relationship we can have. And Paul says these words that sometimes are found controversial. He said, wives, submit to your own husbands as you do the Lord. Now, when the women of Ephesus would have read these words, you know what they would have said? Tell me something I don't know, Paul. Tell me something I don't know. Because in that world, history tells us women didn't have the same rights as men. Their responsibility was to take care of their husband, to look after the family. They were less than. That's what they were. And in our world, where some people like to cherry pick verses to manipulate God's word, to make it say what they want it to say, they might just stop right there. Hey, Bible says, wives, you got to submit to husbands, so sorry, can't do anything about it. But Paul doesn't stop there. Paul goes on and he says, husbands, love your wives. Now, if Paul would have stopped there as well, no big deal. Yeah, sure, I love my wife. Got a roof over her head, got food on the table. I love her. But Paul continues on. He says, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Just as Christ loved the church? What does that mean? How much did Jesus love? He gave his life for her. Not just his physical life by death on a cross, but he laid down his rights for her sake. This is controversial 2,000 years ago. Because 2,000 years ago, this is not something men were told. This was the controversial passage that Paul was saying 2,000 years ago. And maybe it's a foreign concept to us as well. Because in our culture, while women and men and husbands and wives are on equal footing for the most part, I think we've lost the sense of what it means to submit to one another. And it's so important that before Paul ever gets to those words about wives submitting and husbands loving as Christ loved the church, he says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another. See, Paul is referring to the most intimate relationship now, but he keeps connecting it back to Jesus. And he keeps connecting it back to the church. Because marriage is one of the greatest reflections of God's love to this world. Or at least it should be. But we miss it sometimes. We miss it sometimes. And this is what Paul is trying to say to husbands and wives, that this should be a submission competition with our spouse. A submission competition. Now, if you're not married, don't check out on me just yet, because this has implications for all of us. Because here's what my guess is that if you're not married, my hope is, or your hope probably is, that someday you will be. And even if not, you all know people who are married, that are in your circle of influence. But this most sacred of unions, Paul says, should be a submission competition. When I meet with young couples who are getting ready to be married and do premarital counseling with them, I tell them, this is a race. You're in a race now, not to the front of the line, to the back of the line. Who can race to the back of the line to serve the other better? Because this is how Jesus served us. He willingly laid down his life for your sake and for mine, and what he would call the church, his bride. This is the foundation of the Christian life. Mutual submission, choosing to put others before yourself. I mean, isn't it true Isn't it true that the happiest people that you know are always serving? They're always giving of themselves. And it doesn't make any sense, does it? Because the world says, like, you need to look out for you need to get what you can get, right? And these people are always giving, and they give some more. They're constantly sacrificing and putting aside their own needs and wants and their own, what I would prefer. And they're the happiest people that we know. And on the other side, we know people who are selfish. We know people who are always looking for a way to get more for themselves. And they'll manipulate and they'll step on anybody they have to get ahead. And they'll accumulate a lot of stuff. And aren't they some of the most miserable people that we know? They have all the things, and they're miserable. And so when Paul is compelling wives to submit to their husbands and husbands to love their wives, it is because it is how God has designed us to live in community. Mutual submission, putting one another's needs before me, demonstrating humility and patience and honor. And so let's ask this question. When do you feel the gap between who you are and who you want to be? My guess is it shows up right here in relationships, in your relationships. When someone frustrates you, that gap shows up. When you don't get your way, maybe that gap shows up. When it would be easier to protect yourself than humble yourself. That's where the gap becomes visible between who I am and who I want to be. But I also think that that's where growth can happen. You all know, and we all know that there are couples and people who are married, and we go, man, I hope I have a marriage like that someday. I just love the way that they interact with each other and the way they serve each other. I hope I have a marriage like that someday. And the truth is, you can. You can have relationships like that. Maybe it doesn't happen overnight. I hope that if you were to ask my wife, that she would say to you that I'm a better husband today than I was almost 27 years ago when we got married. I hope that she would say I'm a better husband than I am 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even last year. I remember, early on in our marriage, she might ask me to do something and I would just kind of grumble about it. Like, well, I don't have to do that. I didn't make the mess. I didn't do it. It wasn't good. And now I try to look for ways to help and to serve and to love her better. Now, she might also tell you he's got a long way to go, and she wouldn't be wrong. She would not be wrong. I certainly do. I'm not there yet. But it is my prayer that I will serve her well and ultimately love her the way that Jesus loves me better than I did yesterday. And my prayer that I would love her tomorrow better than I did today. Closing that gap. To be clear, submission isn't about, giving up who you are. It's not about losing your voice. It's about reflecting Jesus. By choosing humility, by choosing to serve, by choosing to sacrifice. A submission competition looks like this. It's listening instead of insisting. It's serving instead of demanding. It's forgiving, this is a big one, instead of keeping score. It's choosing unity over having to be right, over winning the argument. And when community looks like that, maybe a community like this one, people grow, but not alone, together. And so let's come back to that gap that we know in our lives, the gap between who you are and who you want to be. What if that gap isn't something that you were meant to close all by yourself? What if God designed growth to happen in community? Because I think we've seen today that when we walk together, when we challenge each other, when we submit to one another, we grow together. But we must be willing to let people in and understand that change doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. And so here's a question that I want you to think through as we get ready to close here this morning. What would it look like to see your life as being shaped over time, not alone, but together? To give yourself grace, to give those around you grace, and even more specifically, what's one step that you could take this week towards that kind of community? Maybe it just starts where you just need to be honest where you're at, where you're stuck, where you're frustrated. Maybe it's inviting somebody into that frustration with you, to speak life into where you're at, to journey alongside with you. Maybe it's choosing humility in a relationship in your life, because God is not just forming you, He is forming us together. And so as we close our time together, I want to invite you to take some time and process what that looks like in your life. And as we've been doing these last several weeks, that question is going to be on the screen while we sing. And I want you to process through that. And when you feel ready, you can go to any of the prayer stations, and maybe you have a prayer request that you want to write out that we would be happy to pray along with you this week. Maybe you want to grab communion and thank God for what He has done in your life and what He is doing in your life. Maybe you want to light a candle, just a way to invite God in, to light a dark area. Maybe you're just not even sure where to start, or maybe you know exactly where to start. And God, I just want you to light it up. Because the truth is this: if we want to close the gap between who we are and who we want to be, we can't do it alone. Paul makes that so very clear. We grow together in community with each other. Would you pray with me this morning? Father, I am so grateful that you didn't design us to do this life alone. And I think maybe sometimes the first step is the hardest step, to say, I can't do it all by myself. I need other people in my life. And so if there are those of us in here who says there is a gap between who I am and who I want to be, God, may you make it clear to us what our next step is. Whether it's just being honest with ourselves or opening up and inviting someone else in, choosing humility, whatever that looks like, Father. May we take the steps that you are calling us to take so that we can be all that you have created us to be. We love you, and we ask these things in your name. Amen.